Hi everybody, this is Sam Stevens, Greybull District Biologist, and I'm going to be going through our proposed hunting seasons for 2025. We're going to start off with pronghorn up in the Carter Mountain Herd Unit. So the Carter Mountain Pronghorn Herd Unit is hunt areas 78, 81, and 82. This is effectively everything west of Greybull and Lovell. It's a migratory herd of pronghorn that migrates from some of that lowland country in Bighorn County in the winter up into the higher reaches of the Greybull River and the South Fork of the Shoshone. Currently, we're meeting our population objective. The latest estimate was 6,342 animals. Fawn ratio increased slightly after the last 5 years of being relatively stagnant, which is a good sign. It's a sign that this population could be increasing slightly. However, we're still at the lower end of our population objective range. Buck ratio has also been pretty static, doesn't seem to be impacted too much by some of the harvest. And looking at harvest, we're around 900 animals harvested this last year, which is pretty consistent with the past 5-year average. So as far as proposals for 2025, the main one that we have proposed is the resurrection of the Hunt Area 78 Type 7 license. This is something that we actually instituted in 2021, and we took it away in 23, mostly just because of a lack of need. This was really introduced initially because of an influx of migratory animals that moved down onto private ag ground in Bighorn County later in the season. And so originally, we were putting out between 100 and 200 licenses with this Type 7 tag, and now we're looking at bringing it back, but with only 50 licenses. In addition to this, we're also looking at making a slight adjustment to our Hunt Area 82 Type 8 license, reducing those from 50 down to 25, and that's really just to make it more equal with what's being harvested on that license type. Moving east into Hunt Area 79, this is a hunt area that's managed as part of the Copper Mountain Herd Unit. This is effectively everything on the west slope of the Bighorns, north of Ten Sleep. The main proposal that we have this year is a Type 0 license, which is a muzzleloader only tag. This would be 25 licenses running the whole month of October. And so we chose that season so that it doesn't conflict with the very popular Type 9 archery season, which runs from August 15th to September 30th. And so we're offering this just as an additional opportunity. There's been a lot of folks expressing the desire to want to hunt pronghorn later in the season and with additional license types that aren't just restricted to irrigated land or 1/2 mile within irrigated land. And so this is just an opportunity that we feel like we can afford given the abundance of pronghorn in the hunt area. Moving on to deer. So starting up north with the Shoshone River mule deer herd, this is hunt areas 121, 122, and 123. Essentially, it's all the riparian and ag land that's adjacent to the lower Shoshone River between Lovell and Cody. This is a population that's significantly below its population objective of 5,000 animals. So the latest estimate was 1,403. I would take that decrease between 23 to 24 with a grain of salt. I think some of that could be a modeling error. It's just given that we're using an integrated population model and we've never done a true siteability survey to anchor this model. However, the lower population, I believe, is accurate. I think a lot of this has been driven by increased CWD prevalence in the last 5 years, where we're now hovering around 50%. The fawn ratio has also been relatively stagnant for years. 10 to 15 years ago, we had one of the higher performing mule deer herds in the Bighorn Basin in the Shoshone River herd, where we had really high fawn ratios. And in the last 5 or 6 years, for whatever reason, it seems like our fawn recruitment has really decreased and stagnated at that lower rate. So, no new proposals for 2025. The main thing is just trying to stay consistent with the decreased quotas and decreased non-resident quota that we made last year. Moving south to the Greybull River herd unit, this is hunt areas 124, which is a general unit, and 165, which is a limited quota unit. Similar to the Shoshone River herd, this is another low elevation, predominantly riparian and agricultural land herd unit that is mostly comprised of non-migratory animals. And this is another herd that has been hit really hard by CWD. So the last 4-year average has been 45% prevalence amongst adult males. And we've really seen that play out over the last 5 years, where we've seen this population really start to crater. And we've tried to make some adjustments to ensure that we're not contributing to that decline by really pulling back harvest. When you look at just kind of how prevalence has increased basically since 2019 and look at that charted over the last 10 years with the number of deer that we're counting in blue and the number of deer that hunters are harvesting in orange, you can see that there's a pretty indirect correlation between those two trends. Another thing that we're noticing in this herd is that when you look at how CWD prevalence relates to the composition of older age class males within the herd unit, you can see that with an increasing CWD prevalence on the x-axis, you actually see fewer and fewer of those class 2 and class 3 bucks. So these are bucks that have an outside antler spread of 20 inches or greater. You see that start to decrease as we've entered into these last few years where CWD prevalence has really exceeded 40%. And the way that we understand that is it's likely due to the fact that, these deer just aren't surviving to that older age class. So similar to the Shoshone River herd, we have no new proposals for this year. We've really tried to dial back harvest in Area 124 just because of a general lack of deer. And so the latest change was a decrease in the non-resident Region X quota. So we're just looking to maintain that conservative change. Moving over to the Paint Rock Mule Deer herd, this is hunt areas 41, 46, and 47. This is a population that is currently still within our objective range, but at the lower end of our objective range. The latest estimate was 7,124 deer. The last year of CWD monitoring, we got a prevalence rate of 17%. This is pretty static given the last 4 years. It doesn't seem like it's changing much, which is a good sign. We hope to at least maintain it and not allow it to increase. The fawn ratio has also been relatively productive. The last 3 years, beginning in 2021, fawn ratios increased to 66 fawns per 100, again to 75 per 100, and then again to 72 per 100. This year, in 24, we saw them back off a little bit, back down to 65 fawns per 100. For reference, what we want to shoot for as managers is a fawn ratio of about 66 fawns per 100. It's an indication to us that we have a growing population. So you can see that this year we're just slightly underneath that. But similarly, as a direct result of increased multiple consecutive years of good fawn recruitment, we've also seen a steady increase in our buck ratio. So our buck ratio right now is hovering around 30 bucks per 100. And a lot of this is just due to the fact that we've had multiple successful years of yearling buck recruitment turning into 2-year-old and 3-year-old buck recruitment. And the yearling per doe ratio, the yearling ratio as well, was also fairly good this year with 13 yearling bucks per 100. And similar to the past 2 herd units, this is another one that we don't have anything new proposed for 2025, other than just trying to maintain the recent reduction in the non-resident Region R quota from last year. It's something that we've noticed with this herd going back several years now, where we've been pretty diligent about collecting teeth and measuring antler spread is we have the ability to look at a pretty good sample size of harvested bucks and look at how their antler development relates with their ages. And as you can see with the red line there, that's paint rock basically over the last 4 years. And what we notice in this herd that seems relatively unique to the Bighorn Mountains is that these deer seem to be plateauing around 4.5, and they're really not excelling to that larger age class that you might see over in western or southern Wyoming. Another unique thing about this herd is that we've started a GPS collaring project in 2021. This year is actually the last year that we'll be monitoring any of these deer. Currently, we have 53 does, 18 fawns, and 10 bucks on air fitted with GPS collars. And it's really been cool to be able to look the last 3 years and see how adult female survival varies from year to year. And so, beginning in the first full year was 2022, we had 92% of those animals make it from January 1st through December 31st. The following year was 86%, and this latest year was 82%. All in all, if you're managing a mule deer herd, you typically should see in a healthy population between 80 and 90% survival. And so, all things considered, especially given that CWD is a significant cause of mortality in these areas, that's a relatively high survival rate, definitely higher than what we're anticipating finding. This is also a herd that I mentioned. We have resident non-migratory deer in some of those lower elevation river bottom populations. This is one that we have deer that exhibit both life history strategies. We have deer predominantly in Hunt Area 47 that are migrating basically from a lot of that country north of Hyattville and outside of Shell, further north, 20 to 30 miles up around Burgess Junction in the summertime. And then in Hunt Area 41, we have more deer that are either short distance migrants migrating 5 to 10 miles up and down the slope of the Bighorns to totally non-migratory deer that live within a relatively common home range 12 months out of the year. So moving north into the North Bighorn mule deer herd, this is a herd that's managed in concert with the Sheridan region. And for our side, we manage hunt areas 50, 51, 52, and 53. This is one that is also at the lower end of its population objective. As you can see, the objective was reviewed in 2023. And so the reason that objective range was brought down like that was just to try to make it more accurate with what's possible within this herd unit. This is a herd that for the longest time we didn't have a true siteability survey or a true abundance estimate conducted within the population. And so once that was done in the winter of 22-23, we were able to kind of retroactively look back at past year's estimates. And from what we found, and this was true in the paint rock herd as well, is that these objectives were probably unrealistically too high given the growth potential of some of these populations. This is one that has kind of been dissimilar to the paint rock herd, where we've seen relatively stagnant fawn recruitment for the last 5 or 6 years. As you can see, fawn ratios have averaged about 58 fawns per 100 does the last 6 years. Buck ratios similarly are also a little bit lower. And our harvest also decreased quite a bit this last year. If you look at CWD prevalence, hunt areas 50, 52, and 53 kind of stand out and are set apart from hunt area 51. The main difference there is that you've got higher elevation hunt areas there where you got more migratory animals, and 51 is more low elevation. There's a lot of ag land, and so you probably have a good contingent of those deer that are being harvested or those resident animals. And with a smaller home range, we are finding that some of these deer have a higher possibility of picking up CWD in their lifetime. This is another one that we've been monitoring these deer since 2020. with GPS collars. As you can find, the vast majority of these deer are migratory, and they're migrating 20 to 30 miles across the Bighorns, mostly summering on the east side and wintering over on our side, on the west side. And last year, 2024, we had pretty good doe survival of 85%, and also our juvenile survival was relatively high at 71%. So for the past few years, we've been receiving quite a few hunter concerns regarding trophy quality of bucks up in Ontario 53 and 50. Um, One of the things that we're noticing in Area 53 is that we've harvested very few deer that have aged past 4.5 years old. Going back to 2021, we've only just had a handful of 5-year-old deer, and actually we haven't aged anything beyond that. We did notice in 2021 we had a uniquely low fawn ratio of 54 fawns per 100 does. And following that, the subsequent winter, we actually saw a pretty severe winter mortality where we lost about 50% of those. And that was based on estimates that we got basically from two different data sources. One was collared fawns, and then also was conducting our change in ratio spring deer classifications. Similar to the paint rock herd, what we find in the bighorns, specifically northern bighorns here, is we see that antler quality, as far as maximum antler width, kind of plateaus right around 4.5, 5.5 years old. And so one thing that's been requested by us is to institute antler point restriction to try to respond to this lack of trophy quality bucks. So kind of following in line with that, one thing that we're looking at doing this year is proposing a 3-point APR in hunt areas 50 and 53. We receive a lot of comments every year about hunters wanting us to implement antler point restrictions in multiple different hunt areas. Generally, it's due to a general perceived lack of deer or lack of trophy deer. One of the main apprehensions that we have about implementing APRs is CWD concern. If you institute an antler point restriction, you're in effect going to prevent the harvest of younger age class bucks. In the bighorns, that essentially means you're preventing harvest of yearlings and 2-year-old deer. And I think in a vacuum, that could work as long as you are ensuring you're still going to have good harvest conditions and you're going to be able to harvest those deer at 3.5 years old once they age out of that period in which APRs would prevent their harvest. But looking at hunt areas 50 and 53, we have relatively low CWD prevalence in those two hunt areas, largely because they're mostly composed of migratory deer that have a larger home range. And so we feel like this is something that we can work with the public to try to offer an APR in these two hunt areas without running too much of a risk of increasing CWD. And so finally, just to wrap up with deer, we'll cover our whitetail licenses. So our type 3 and type 8 licenses are the license types that we predominantly manage whitetail with, especially where we have sympatric populations of whitetail coalescing with mule deer. And the only proposal that we have for 2025 is just a slight reduction in type 3 tags for hunt area 41. And this is really just to address some hunter concerns and comments we've received over the past couple of years about overcrowding on some of the limited number of public access areas, a lot of the BLM, and then the handful of walk-in areas that are still around. And kind of following up on the conversation about migratory deer versus resident non-migratory deer, what we find with whitetail is significantly higher rates of CWD within these sympatric populations of whitetail. And again, it's similar to with those resident mule deer herds. It has more to do with just limited, smaller home range sizes. These deer are living in the same home range 12 months out of the year, and it's relatively small compared to a migratory deer that might winter, in one particular area for 4 to 5 months and then spend the rest of the year in a totally different area that's removed 10 to 30 miles away. So we'll move on to elk. So starting up north with the North Bighorn elk herd, similar to the North Bighorn deer herd, this is a herd that is managed collectively with the Sheridan region. And so for the Cody region, we just cover hunt areas 39 and 40. And I think just to kind of set the table for elk here, I think the general theme you're going to see is that we've been fairly aggressive with trying to really ramp up harvest in all of our elk areas over the past 5 to 6 years. And now that we're getting to a point where we're really starting to see a lot of these elk areas and elk herds come within our objective range, we're going to start proposing that we dial back some of that harvest pressure. And so, just to kick it off real quick with the North Bighorn herd, the 2024 winter trend count for our side or our half of the North Bighorn herd was 897. The objective is 1,350. So already you can see that we're down. A lot of this is being driven by Hunt Area 40, where we try to maintain about 850 animals. And for the last 3 years, we've averaged about 350 elk. We have still high recruitment. We're still above that threshold of 24 calves per 100 cows that typically grows a population. Another thing to consider is that we don't have the large carnivore predation over on this side of the basin that you might have over on the west side. And so wolf or grizzly bear predation isn't a huge concern for us. Harvest the last few years has been relatively steady. It was down slightly in area 40, and some of that was partially due to the fact that we made some cuts in 2024 with some of our cow licenses. So the main proposal that we have for this year is we're looking at dialing back harvest pressure in area 40. And we're just trying to make the hunter opportunity and experience more commensurate with the elk availability that's out there. We've been getting increased comments and concerns from hunters about a general lack of elk. And again, a lot of this is largely due to the fact that we have successfully whittled down this elk herd over the last several years. So we're looking at reducing the 40 type 1 tags by 50 and also reducing the 40 type 9 tags by 25. The third proposed change that we have here is a reduction of 2539 type 1 licenses. And this is only to account for a carryover of 40 licenses from 2024 that were going to be carried over because hunters opted out of hunting last year due to the wildfire access closures. So moving south into Medicine Lodge. So this is hunt areas 41 and 45. Similar to North Bighorns, this is a population where for the first time in about 15 years, we are down and we are actually at the lower end of our objective range right now. So if you consider that a trend objective is the last 3 years of trend counts, the current trend is 1,956. Our trend objective is 2,200. And given that the last year we counted 1,484 and the 2 years prior to that, it's just slightly above that. We are, as I said, down. Harvest has steadily held pretty high in both areas 41 and 45. And again, this has been by design. We've tried to really be aggressive, specifically in area 41, where we threw out a lot of different license types and increased licenses over the years, really trying to drive this elk herd down to our objective range. And just to break it out by hunt area, just to give you a sense of where we're still counting elk, in hunt area 41 this last year, we counted 1,152. And in hunt area 45, we were way down. We counted only 332 elk. And as I said, the last few years, we've really increased harvest. And a lot of this started in 2022, where we created several different license types. We tried to address specific overabundance concerns up on the north end of the herd unit. And we also tried to really curb cow abundance with some January hunting seasons, which overall were fairly successful. If you look at, for example, bull harvest, averaged out over the last 3 years, we've harvested an average of about 200 bulls. And if you take the previous 10 years, we're up about 50 bulls compared to what we used to harvest. Similarly with cows, we've also gotten pretty aggressive. So, in response to this, given that we have both been successful in reducing the overall number of elk, including bulls, and the fact that we now have a smaller elk herd that's going to be producing fewer bulls because of a lower recruitment, um, we're looking at dialing back some of that bull harvest. And so this is going to come in the form of a proposed reduction of 41 type 1s, type 2s, type 3s, and type 9s. These are all of our any elk licenses in Area 41. Collectively, this is only a proposed reduction of 85 licenses. However, if you consider that we average about a 40% success rate, you're looking at probably 30 to 40 total elk that you might be removing from the harvest. Um, Along the lines of some of our cow harvest revisions, we're looking at significantly reducing our Type 6 licenses and moving our season back to December. So this is a season that we moved into January the last couple of years, and we were pretty successful. We felt like we kind of had this population decreasing the way that we wanted, and we just wanted to kind of take one more hard bite out of them before we backed everything off. So given where we are now with abundance and objective, we don't feel it's appropriate to be offering 350 additional cow tags nor hunting them in January as we were previously. So we're looking at going back, and also we're looking at giving this December opportunity back to the full price Type 4 licenses. So if you want to hunt in December, you can still do so with a Type 4 tag, or if you're lucky enough to draw one of these remaining Type 6 licenses. Similarly, we're also looking at kind of reallocating some of these licenses up to the northern end of the unit. And this is again just to keep pressure on that northern portion of the herd where elk overabundance has historically always been an issue. And in Hunt Area 45, we're also looking at backing off some of those type 1s, going from 350 to 300. And then similar to what we're trying to do in 41, we're looking at backing off some of the cow harvest, both in the form of reductions in the Type 6 license, but also in reductions to the Type 7 license. So then with bighorn moose, this is a moose herd for the entire bighorn range, hunt areas 1, 34, and 42. Our side, we manage hunt area 42. Currently, we're still above the trend objective. Latest trend count was 184 moose collectively between the three hunt areas. And the 2024 harvest, we harvested 10 moose out of area 1, 7 out of area 34, and 8 out of area 42. Something that we've really taken a close look at in the bighorns over the last several years has been trying to improve riparian habitat quality. It's become a pretty big concern for us. So if you look at the picture on the left there, that's what we would consider more marginal riparian habitat. And on the right is what we'd consider quality habitat. The picture on the right is a much more rare site in the bighorns. What we find is a lot more degraded riparian areas. And the long-term implications of this is that we might not be able to grow as many moose in the bighorns as we are currently unless we remedy some of this. So one of the management actions that we employed started in 2022 was to try to reintroduce beavers into several watersheds within the bighorns. So in 22, we actually did 5 different transplants and moved 20 beavers up into the bighorns. In 23, we followed up with 7 augmentations. And then in 24, we trapped and relocated an additional 12. So as far as bighorn moose proposals, the only thing that we're looking at changing this year is just a slight adjustment into the Type 1 quota by adding 1 license. And finally, moving north to the Devil's Canyon bighorn sheep herd. This is a population that was hit pretty hard by disease beginning in 2022. I'll follow up with that in a minute, but just to touch on our trend count results, 2024, we counted 94 sheep, which is actually a little bit more than what we anticipated finding. We did harvest 8 rams in 2024, and of that 2024 winter count, the way it was broken out was 50 ewes, 15 lambs, and 29 rams. And so, as I said, in 22, we saw a pretty significant die-off that began in October of 22, and it resulted in a reduction of about 44% of the herd. We had a second outbreak of that similar pathogen, which caused an ammonia outbreak in August of 23, and disproportionately, we lost about 80 to 85% of our collared ewes within a month. At the time, we felt like we really needed to address the overabundance of rams because so few rams were targeted with that second die-off. And so our concern is that if this population is going to recover, we need to ensure that we have a lower ram ratio so that we don't have an overinflated cohort of males showing up during breeding season, trying to breed a ewe, and be encouraged to disperse and potentially come into contact with another disease vector, bringing a new pathogen or a new virus back into this population. And so for the time being, we're looking at maintaining a low ram ratio. And in order to do so, we're trying to allocate additional ram licenses with both type 1 and type 2 licenses. So that's all I had. If you guys have any questions, feel free to give me a call at 307-272-2470. You can also call Corey Class, the Wildlife Management Coordinator for the Cody region at the Cody office. Otherwise, you can submit comments at this hyperlink listed here. Just make sure that those comments are submitted by 5 p.m. on April 2nd. Thanks for listening.